Hello and welcome to the Ego Podcast. My name is Dina Jackson and I am your host. We are live from Eggplant Picture and Sound Studios in downtown Toronto, and I have a wonderful guest with me today. He is a TEDx speaker, he is a producer and talent manager at Good Fun, and he's also the creator of the Run to Wellness campaign, where he ran 10 half marathons across Canada in support of mental health. Please welcome Mr. Jacob Morris. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. This is exciting. I have lots of questions for you. So,
yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
So I'm interested in a lot of things about you, and I love asking guests kind of when we start off just a little bit about your story and like what brought you here. I know that's a very broad question, so I'll narrow it down a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit about your work and your TEDx talk, because I know that inspired. Was that before or after you did the Run to Wellness campaign?
The TEDx talk was just afterwards.
Just afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was right. The two things were kind of intertwined,
Yes.
because there was some mental health stuff in your own kind of path that sparked that, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that. Also, particularly just to preface, because some people who listen to the podcast really want to get into meditation or something in support of mental health, but they're not in love with practicing yoga or something that we tend to talk about on here a lot. So I know with you, it's running. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into how I got into, meditation and running and using running kind of as my own meditation. A lot of it was by necessity. Mm-hmm. In 2015, I was working a job as a video producer. That's more or less creative production of some kind is more or less what I do on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. I was working for a company, a decent, salaried position, which was nice right out of school. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't really following, something that I was passionate about. And that, along with, several other things, kind of led me into pretty deep depression. I was dealing with lots of anxiety. And just feeling kind of trapped. Mm-hmm. I wasn't someone who ever practiced any kind of yoga or any kind of meditation or something like that before. But one thing that I did find to kind of help me deal with, what I was going through with my own mental health was running. So I hadn't, aside from, playing outside as a kid, I never, went for a 5K or anything like that mm-hmm. until I bought a pair of shoes and kind of stepped outside and took a short little run and felt, like this physical activity and giving myself this space to kind of work through some of the things that I was going through mm-hmm. Was kind of my entry point to that. Mm-hmm. As far as Run to Wellness goes, the campaign with 10 half marathons that I did, that was all about just wanting to prove to myself that I could take on this large challenge mm-hmm. And complete it, as crazy as that sound. Before I went out and ran the 10 half marathons on that campaign, I think we did in 23 days too, all across
wow.
Canada.
That's a lot of running.
I ran, I think, 2 half marathons completed before that in my entire life.
Oh, wow.
So although I did do a good amount of training leading up to it, I think there's this perception of running that you have to be the fastest, or the whole goal is to, join a running race and try to beat times and get across the finish line first. But for me, I am not a super fast runner at all. Mm-hmm. For me, it's all about the process. Mm-hmm. So I knew that, I wasn't going to go out and set any world records for completing super fast half marathons, but I could go out and I could, complete the distance while proving to myself that this is something that, not only I could complete, but then showing other people that running is a positive way that you can deal with a lot of your mental health issues. Mm-hmm. At least it worked for me.
That's so cool. I like what you're saying in terms of enjoying the process, because that's something that I'm a comedian, but I also teach yoga and meditation. And one thing that I'm always relearning and telling myself constantly is that it is about the process, right? And that things like meditation help me to do that and stay balanced. So I can recognize what you're saying and appreciate that. I also want to ask you about, because I think on an interview I saw you said that you compared running to being like a meditative experience. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think One thing for me that always kind of, clutters my mind is just stillness in general. So I can get so wrapped up in my thoughts and find it kind of hard to deal with things, especially, once they start piling up, it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. For me, running is, because it's such an active thing, just as it is, a physical activity. They talk about the runner's high. When you get locked into a pace, all you have to focus on, similar to meditation, if you're focusing on breathing exercises, running is so similar in that sense, where it's just about putting one foot in front of the other, and you're just traveling through space that might otherwise be super distracting or just help, or that might add to your stresses. If you're walking down the street, you're picking up on everything that's kind of in front of you. But I find when I'm running, or I get out in nature, I'm on a path, Don Valley Trail, for example, here in Toronto, that's something where I feel really at peace just in the movement itself. And then also, just the physical activity that's being placed on my body. At the end of it, I feel like I've worked through something.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that analogy too, because you gave me lots of visuals while you were describing that. I can picture you on the Don Valley Trail doing that. I think it's like I mentioned this just for a moment before, but I really think that it's great that you've been able to find an activity that can lead you into that state, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, the goal with yoga and the goal with meditation is to find stillness. That's essentially what it is. So if you can find that in something else, it's very refreshing to hear, because I've heard listeners say to me before, I like what you're talking about. I really understand what you're saying about meditation. I enjoy using an app or what have you, but I just can't get into yoga. Yoga is my thing that I found. Running is your thing. And I think there's so many other things out there that we can do to kind of just maintain that focus, right? And be able to put one foot in front of the other.
And I think that was a large part of the Run to Wellness campaign as well. Something that I talked all about as we were doing this was, running is the thing that helps me, but that's not to say it's going to help everybody, but it is, like you're saying, it's that entry point to start to be able to use something as a tool to help you in other ways. And I mean, obviously, I personally love it, but there are a million other things that you could do, I think. Right. And then the other thing about running as well that I find, to paint more pictures, is when you're running and you run past someone, you get a little nod sometimes, a thumbs up. For me, a lot of that was just about recognizing this community outside of it, and then being able to kind of place myself in this larger picture of the world, as opposed to just being like locked inside my own head and just being overwhelmed by that too.
I like that. Because I wouldn't necessarily think that right away as there being community in running, but what would I know? I'm not a runner. So that's very cool. I think you're right. You can find that anywhere where you connect with someone else, and finding that connection is very cool if it's something that you both enjoy. Yeah,
and even something, I mean, it's, silly apps that have, a certain distance. For example, the Don Valley Trail, you can go and
for example.
I know, and you can say like, oh, I was, one of the fastest people today on this, or like I helped complete, this challenge or whatnot. There is a community, and that was a big aspect of it for me as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. One question I want to ask you, because this is the Ego podcast, and the name kind of sprouted because I mentioned I'm a comedian. I work in entertainment, and there's a lot of ups and downs, and something that helped me manage living in that industry is practicing meditation. So I'm wondering on that is, there's a lot of influences in the world right now, a lot of ideologies around fame and success. And I feel as though, in my opinion, those can kind of move us away from our initial intent. And I think you were touching on this a little bit before, when you were not feeling as happy at your job, right? Just leading with what you really want deep down, what your soul wants, if you, so to speak. And I feel like it can move away from that, these ideologies around success and fame. And so I'm wondering what your experience has been with this, either in your work or just in your everyday life, and how you work to balance that.
Well, I think that was a big part of it too. I left my job in that kind of, spring of 2015 time. And just before the Run to Wellness campaign, I was offered this really, really nice job out in Vancouver. I've always wanted to live on the West Coast, but it wasn't something that I was really passionate about. Even though, it might have fulfilled a dream that I had at one point, it wasn't calling my name at that particular time. Decided to turn that down to essentially put myself into a little bit of debt and run around the country. But I know what you're talking about. There's there are a million different pressures on you at all times. I've lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, you were first talking about BC, which I love. I lived out there, and I could see the pull. But yeah, if it's not a job that you love, then it's really, you got to go. You can't just move somewhere just for the location. There has to be more than one reason, in my opinion. But yeah, we were just talking about, how ideologies around success and things like that can sway someone away from their initial purpose with what they're doing.
Right. And I think that's something that I've started to do recently too, is kind of redefining what success means for me. Good Fun is a company that I started myself. I find that I've only ever had one, apart from freelance jobs, I've only ever had one boss in my life.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, that job. Great guy. But also I find that I like working for myself and following a million, various different creative passions at the same time, being able to set my own schedule. And that's not necessarily, going to give me, huge financial success, maybe day to day. But I don't think that is really something that's going to, fulfill my heart, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that I'm on a path to do these days. And, again, back to the campaign, that was something that I also wanted to preach a little bit was, even if there is a big challenge or you want, a big change sitting in front of you, for me, quitting my job, deciding to, run around the country, and then also try to start my own company after that. Yeah, I think that, again, back to the process, taking on that process, even if they're going to be, small failures or big failures here and there, is so much more rewarding than it is to maybe, go with something that's going to be okay.
Right. Settling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah. And it's a big moment when you have that kind of realization, because everyone's path is different, right? And some people are very happy in a more kind of structured setting. My younger sister, she likes structure and order, and she's very organized, and that's wonderful. Whereas me, if I was doing the same thing over and over again, I would probably explode, right? But that's because we're different.
Yeah.
We're made different ways. So I don't think there's any wrong way to do something. But like you're saying, if you're in a scenario and you're very unhappy and it starts to affect your well-being, you start suffering from things like depression, then that's when you got to have those moments, hopefully, and say, okay, how can I make that shift and what can I do? And it sounds like you really did that with this campaign.
And it's really, it's some of these things, after you kind of make the decision to try something new, whether it be, downloading a meditation app and trying out the basic package or something like that, after you do them, they're like, you see these, sometimes really big shifts in just your own perspective on things. But, to make the decision to download that app, or, put on your shoes and go at the door and do some yoga, sometimes can seem like a huge shift in how you think about yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And you, a lot of people probably wouldn't define themselves as yogis, or, they might have a negative perception about what that is, or, to compare it to what I do, maybe they have a negative perception, or don't think of themselves as a runner, like, oh, I would never be able to cross the finish line. But it's so important, I think, to just go out and try stuff. Just try a million different things and see what sticks for you. And that's what I find interesting about, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too. And also, like, retrying things in some ways, because like I remember first trying yoga a few years ago, not really understanding any of the philosophy behind it, just the physical. And so I just didn't really get it. And then I think in the last couple of years I got yoga, so it was a very different experience. And I think I wasn't really ready to understand those things, 5-6 years ago. So everybody's different, but it's very cool that you are finding that with running. So I'd love to hear about your day-to-day process in terms of, like, do you run every single day? Do you run a half marathon every single day? Do you meditate while you're running? Do you meditate after you're running? What is your what's your day like?
I'm someone, again, I don't really like the set routine very much. And just because of what I do, I'm working with, I'm essentially a talent manager these days as well, where I'm working with people that are based all across the world. So my day-to-day schedule looks a little bit different. So a lot of the time I'm using these, using meditation or running as a way to kind of balance out what the rest of my daily schedule looks like. A lot of the time these days I'm running in the afternoon. A lot of people don't like it, but I love running in the beating down sun and in the hottest part of the day. And then I've started to kick off the day with a meditation in the morning, which is, I find, a good way to kind of jump out of bed and then try to center myself before I get to the various things I have to do that day. I think I have this tendency, and I feel like a million people have it as well, is to, as soon as you wake up, hit your phone's alarm and just pick up your phone and start scrolling through stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I do it all the time. I have to admit, but it's probably not the best way to start the day. No,
it's definitely the worst. It's probably one of the worst ways to start the day.
Yeah. So I've slowly tried to make a shift to, if I'm going to pick up my phone, use Headspace or something like that, that's going to be a little bit more positive for me than, scrolling through what's the latest post on Instagram.
Yeah, but it's self-discipline that can move you to that position where you can do that, right? Because there is that lovely, that ping sound or those little bubbles popping up or those little hearts, and you're like, I just need to see it. I need that rush, right?
Yeah.
So if you can get to a point, because to your point, everything is on our phone. Everything. I mean, for me, my alarm is on there, email, everything. So taking that time, I've been trying to do something where I wake up in the morning and I won't look at my phone for the first hour of the day. So I'll get up and I'll meditate. But do you know how many days I fail at that? Many days. So good on you. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's also, and maybe this is just being biased because I work a lot of the time with Instagrammers as well on different campaigns and whatnot. I think there's a time and a place to be able to scroll through Instagram, because there are sometimes you want to check up on your family and see what they're doing, or have some travel inspiration or something like that. But again, for me, and I think what would be positive for other people too, is just being conscious of what a balance looks like in your life, and knowing what the effects are going to be on you if you're at night. Oh, the night is worse too. If you're, spending 2 hours before bed just scrolling through stuff and not focusing on winding down. Sleep has been hugely important for me too. So I mean, yeah, that's something that I'm focusing on, even though I'm not maybe the best at it right now.
I'm not either. I tried different things. One thing is called Yoga Nidra, which is just a meditation that it's like kind of like a body scan, but you can do it to kind of calm your subconscious mind.
Yep.
So I try to do that before I go to sleep, because my problem is that I can fall asleep no problem, but then I wake up and then I can't fall back asleep at like 4 or 5, and it's apparently the subconscious mind still going, right?
Oh, interesting.
So the body was tired, right? Yeah. So the body slept, and then the mind was still going. So that's something before I would just take a pill or melatonin or some of that kind of stuff. And now I'm trying to do different things to take action over that, because
I think back to kind of trying stuff too. I think one thing that has helped me as well in the various things that I'm doing is being patient with myself. If something is not working, you kind of mentioned that as well, like if you tried to get into yoga and maybe didn't work the first time, is being patient with yourself and not getting down on yourself if you're not very good at something or you don't think that it's working. Again, I think just being curious is interesting.
Yeah, I love that concept too, though, of being patient and also just showing yourself a little bit of love. Like it's not, you don't have to be perfect at everything right away, especially. So if you can try, like you're saying, and give it a fair go and see how you feel when you're doing it. Like, are you enjoying this, regardless of how well or how quick you're doing it, or how well you're doing at it? How do you enjoy the process, like you were saying? Because if you do, then that's more than half the battle, right?
And are there any distractions that you are kind of getting in your way that you're maybe not acknowledging as distractions? Can you eliminate those to maybe, like, you give it a solid try where you're actually totally focused on doing something.
Yeah. I really hope that listeners who have told me they don't like yoga are listening to this episode. I'm really going to pump it up that way because they're like, I just can't get there. I just don't like it. I have family members who've said that.
I've always been someone who's said like, oh, I can't even do downward dog. Like it's, I don't know.
Yeah. And that's fine. I mean, I would say everyone can do yoga, but they have to want to do it.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
If you don't want to do it, then why put yourself through something you don't want to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not fun. What would your advice be to someone in that position, someone who is interested in trying meditation or just taking some time for mental health, but maybe would be more interested in taking a running route? Like, how did it start for you? Because you said you put on some shoes one day and you ran out, and then you ran 10 half marathons. What was the process like there?
In between that, well, I think for me, running, give you another image, it's kind of like a running or a rubber band. I like started with just around my block. And it was a city block, I don't know, maybe 300 meters or something like that, the whole loop that I did, which is not very far for running, at least distance running. But then as I kind of, got to a place where, maybe I was heavy, breathing heavily off the top of that one, the next time I did it, maybe I felt a little bit stronger. I was, again, kind of practicing patience, where I was patient with myself and would expand the distance that I was running as I became comfortable with how I was feeling during those runs. Kind of got to a place where, doing a 5K felt good. After that, throwing a few 10Ks here and there, which is, for your average kind of distance runner, that's kind of, typical distance to go out. And then, there was one day that it kind of in the block of time when I was feeling really great with how I was running, I just set out to do kind of an evening 5 kilometers. And I got to 5K and I wasn't near my home. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll just, run up here a little bit. Did a couple of more, got closer to my home. But then I was like, oh, I'm still feeling pretty good. So I pushed it a little further. You should probably, if you're going to do a half marathon, maybe, eat something first.
Yeah, probably. Good advice.
I got all the way up, essentially what was 10 and a half kilometers away from my home then, and I was 10 and a half kilometers into the run, so about halfway, and I was like, well, I guess I still have to go back, so I may as well try to hit the next
no
distance.
Food? You had no food in your stomach?
Well, it was kind of the end of the day, but it was, I hadn't had dinner yet, but it was beautiful. I was running down Bloor Street, which was closed down for a street festival or something during the spring or summer, I think it was. And it's just running down the middle of the street, and the sun was setting on the end of it. It was just this like crazy out of body experience. Probably because I didn't have enough nutrition.
Yeah, you were floating a little bit. Yeah.
But then also I just felt so good in that moment running. Got home, had a bite to eat, but then felt this like overwhelming sense of accomplishment because it's 21.1 kilometers is
a long way.
It's pretty far.
I have never ran anywhere near that, so yeah.
But then that kind of came like the run for me, and I wanted to kind of replicate that feeling in different spaces.
That's so cool.
Which essentially was Run to Wellness then.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that. I love when people can reflect back on those moments, right? Whatever that moment was where something shifted and you were like, this is what I want to be spending my time, my energy on, and I want to help people in the process. So that's very cool. So then did you recreate that? Do you feel like you recreated that with the campaign?
I think to a certain extent, yes. We documented it as a documentary, and there's a cut of it done, but it's not 100% done yet. Okay. And we're still trying to figure out what does it look like to release this, and how does that come out into the world. Aside from that, I think we were pretty successful in, just wanting to go out and do this. We did a bunch of press while doing it. We connected with people in different cities. One part of it is, aside from the documentary, I just wanted to kind of tell my story.
Yeah.
And I think because I was telling it in a way that reflected on the fact that I wasn't always someone who was comfortable talking about my own emotions and, sharing this version of myself, which was the real version of myself, someone who is super depressed and is dealing with a lot of anxiety, maybe didn't reflect exactly what people thought of me because of how I presented it myself to them. You know, I was always this kind of happy-go-lucky guy. A lot of the time, you know, I was the energy in the room, and I could kind of keep up that facade to a certain extent, even in kind of the darkest of my times. But I felt that I was doing a disservice to myself and then also to other people to not be sharing what the truth was, essentially. So, you know, if everyone always says, and like we said as well, if we could help one person who might be struggling with the same issues during the campaign, amazing. But then so much of it, for me personally as well, was just kind of like this big release of kind of, you know, I'm going to go out and do this because running is something that you know, kind of saved me. And then hopefully through telling that message, people can connect with that and take from it what they will.
Yeah. I think you touch on a few things that I really like there. One thing too, just that what you're talking about in terms of the facade and, you know, keeping up appearances and things, that's something that comes up all the time in the comedy world, because a lot of comedians will kind of be one way on stage and then another way off stage, and I certainly felt that way as well. And I know that a lot of people do, right?
Yeah.
We do feel like we have to kind of wear these masks, and it's an interesting thing, because now I feel like we're coming to a place, at least here in Canada, I will speak to that, where people are becoming a lot more comfortable about talking about mental health. And it's something that fascinates me doing this podcast, because I've had guests on here before who, prior to recording, they have, you know, mentioned that they're a little bit worried about stigma. They're a little bit worried about, you know, what the end result will be with what they share. But then every single one of the people who have said that have been happy that they've done the podcast, because they recognize that in sharing these kinds of things, that someone could potentially be listening who could really find it useful, right? So I think that's very cool that you're doing that on many platforms, through the documentary, through your talks, and then through any kind of press, and then just the campaign in general.
And I think too, like there's so much of you have this certain idea of who you are, right? And a lot of that kind of nervousness around not talking about certain things that are actually a part of you, that's how it is, right? Like that's the truth inside of you, whether you decide to share it or not. That's kind of how it is. So breaking that down is so important.
And doesn't it feel so good? I feel like everybody, as soon as you do that, you address the elephant in the room or any kind of tension, or it could be in your own mind, the elephant, but well,
it's the same as like opening up and trying a meditation app for the first time, right? It's this big decision to, you know, make the step to hit the button to do it, or, you know, to open your mouth to tell your own story. But it's afterward, it's relatively easy and it feels pretty good. And then the resonance with other people, the connection that you build with other people you may not have ever thought or knew that you would connect with, all of a sudden they're like, you know, something that you said or something that you did that really resonated with me, and that feels really good. Well, I think that was one of the biggest things for me too, because the kind of the darkest of my times were in kind of the February-ish, early 2015. But that's not to say that like, oh, I did these runs and then I was cured. I've been perfect. I have my own ups and downs, pretty dramatic, you know, month to month. And sometimes I'm in a bad place, and sometimes I'm, you know, feeling pretty good. Right now, knock on wood, pretty good time.
Yeah, me too.
But I think, you know, making the decision back then to kind of open up and speak about things makes dealing with those, you know, darker times now so much easier, because I know it's not going to be the end of the world, and I know that there are you know, I have my own toolbox that I can open up, and I have these different things that I can try to you know, change my own mental space. And then just having that conversation about it, I don't feel like I have to just keep piling all my own feelings inside myself and not letting them out anymore, which is good.
And just suppressing, right? So, and that's awesome. In meditation, this is one question I like to ask, because I like to see what guests say to this, but in meditation, there's a lot of discussion around the journey inward. And I think you were just touching on that a little bit in terms of what's going on inside, right? And being able to kind of share that through speaking or through any kind of work that you're doing, but that anyone can do just by having these kinds of conversations. So I'm wondering what that means to you, the journey inward in any way, whether it's when you're running, when you're practicing meditation, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, yeah, I think it would just be kind of like it's like the key to unlocking what's in there, and just being okay with what's in there, not having to, kind of totally clean house and just try to make sure that everything that's going on is just 100% positive stuff. Because yeah, kind of like I was just talking about, there are ups and downs all the time. And that's, I don't think that striving for being perfect all the time is A, achievable, or B, like
Fun.
something that's going to be fun, or like, I think that struggle is always going to be a part of the process, and suffering to a certain extent is as well. But yeah, it's just being able to look inside and acknowledge what's going on in there, and then just kind of sit with that, and hopefully be able to come to a place of peace around that, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, like you were saying, you don't want to share all that stuff inside. You don't want to reveal, how you're really feeling if you're dealing with depression or anger or all these feelings that aren't as beautiful to look at or to experience, but they are very real, and everyone goes through them, right? And so the more that we can talk about them and spend time with them, right? And like you were saying before, not just pushing inwards and bottling them up, but feeling them, allowing yourself to kind of sit with that, or let them out in whatever way you can. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, as far as running as a meditation for myself, that's something where that comes out too. I don't know what it is exactly about running or how to describe it perfectly, but like when I'm, again, doing that physical activity, and, maybe it's about trudging up a hill and having to, get over this big physical barrier, whatever's going on in there with my mind definitely draws parallels with, maybe the big stuff that I'm dealing with internally. So yeah, going out on a half marathon, 10K, 5K, whatever it may be, often is in line with maybe what I'm dealing with at that time in my life. So
yeah, that's fair.
If maybe a lot of the downs, you'll look on my Nike app and see that I'm doing high mileage that month or something.
What do you mean by high mileage?
Like going on a lot of different runs.
Oh, yeah. Okay, got it. That's runner lingo. Got it. Cool. No. We gotta go shortly, but I will ask you one more question. So your TEDx talk was done with TEDx Youth, so it was with the younger generation. Was it done in a school by chance, or?
It was done it wasn't done in the school, but there were quite a few schools that came. It was at the Masonic Temple.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is because there's a lot of discussion around incorporating meditation into the school systems now. I know that they have it in York region, which is not in central Toronto, but I don't know if it's part of GTA, but Ontario, in Canada. And then some places are bringing it as more of a regular thing, but there has been some pushback. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think that would be amazing. One thing that stood out to me at the talk, I was pretty nervous, to be honest.
That's pretty normal. I know you're all shy to tell me that. Don't be. That's normal.
I think that was definitely the biggest public speaking kind of event that I had ever done. And yeah, it was to a room of, there must have been 500, 600, high school kids there.
Oh, cool. That's so cool.
And I felt good, sharing my story.
Yeah.
But I felt even better afterward because I was the last talk of the day. So after that, everyone was just kind of mingling around. The kids had an opportunity to come up to the different speakers. And one thing that was super powerful to me, that there was probably 10 different kids that came up to me and said, "Oh, your talk, I really enjoyed your talk. I'm going through something similar right now." Which I was like, oh,
yeah,
it kind of hurt a little bit, but at the same time, like, I'm glad that I could come and share.
Yeah.
But then that kind of leads me to think, if this is something that could help me, meditation, running, whatnot, I think it should absolutely be focused on in curriculum, especially at the high school age. There's so many different pressures happening, and physical body changes and all kinds of stuff that's just changing in your life at that age. And clearly I had the experience of talking to these kids and seeing firsthand. I haven't been to high school for years now, but it doesn't seem like things have changed that much.
Right. Well, they're all still that age that we were all that age at one point, right?
But I think it would only do positive things to be teaching kids, at least a few of the things that I think are, good tools in my toolbox, right?
Yeah.
And that other people might benefit from as well.
That's so cool. So do you have a name for your documentary, or it's still in the process?
It's still under Run to Wellness, but it will be something else. Okay. Hopefully a little bit more inspirational.
No, but that's great. And that's the joy of being a creative person, right? Is that you're always creating. So when you're ready to release it, you will.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Jacob, can you share your website and any social media, any projects you're working on with listeners so they can follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably best reached on Twitter or Instagram at Jacob Morris.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Ego Podcast, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks.